In the heart of Wyoming, they put a widow up for sale, right there in the middle of the town square. $5! The auctioneer shouted. $5 for the woman who owes this town her pride. Laughter rose like thunder, cold, cruel, echoing off the wooden walls and dry wind, until a stranger appeared. He rode in slowly, steady as silence itself, 6 children following behind him like shadows from another world. And when he finally spoke, the whole square seemed to stop breathing. No one that day knew that single moment would change everything for him, for the widow, and for a people still learning what love truly means. Stay with us, and you'll see how love and the quiet strength of family can rise above the weight of judgment. Tell me where you're watching from tonight, and if stories like this still touch your heart, hit subscribe so you never miss the next one. Wishing you a gentle evening and a heart that stays warm. The sun had no mercy that morning. It bore down on the town of Clay Ridge like a sentence passed from heaven itself, relentless, unblinking, and without a shred of pity. Heat shimmered above the roofs of the saloon and the blacksmith's shop, bending the air into ghostly waves that danced above the dirt street. Dust rose with every step and clung to the throats of those gathered in the square, where a crooked wooden sign read, Clay Ridge Courthouse, though justice had long stopped visiting this place. The flies circled lazily over spilled whiskey, and the wind carried the bitter scent of sweat, tobacco, and something older, the kind of rot that grows in hearts when mercy runs dry. By mid-morning, the crowd had thickened. Miners with soot-stained faces, women clutching their shawls, boys perched on fence rails like buzzards waiting for a carcass, all came to watch the spectacle promised by rumor. The widow who owed the town its pride was to be sold. The auction block stood in the center of the square, a wooden platform warped from years of sun and guilt, and upon it stood Maria Granger. She was 25, though the desert had added a decade to her face. Barefoot, wrists bound with a frayed rope that had once tethered a mule, she stared past the crowd, toward the far-off ridge where her husband's unmarked grave slept beneath broken timber. Her hair, once chestnut and soft, was dull now streaked with dust, tangled by grief. Her dress, once blue, had faded to the color of dry riverbeds, but her eyes, pale green, steady as glass, held no fear, only a kind of hollow knowing. The auctioneer, a broad man named Carlton Hayes with a red neck and white hat too clean for honesty, stepped forward. His voice cut through the heat like a whip. $5 for the woman who owes this town her pride. The words rolled off his tongue, slick with contempt. Men spat into the dirt. Women whispered, hungry for scandal. One child laughed high and shrill before his mother hushed him, but not before the sound cracked through Maria's chest like a pebble against stone. Still, she did not flinch. Her hands stayed loose in their bonds, her chin unbowed. Hayes sneered, "Don't be shy, gentlemen. She's strong enough to work, quiet enough not to talk back. $5? Who'll start?" His grin widened when no one spoke. The silence was heavy, the kind that swelled between cruelty and cowardice. Then someone muttered, "Ain't worth feedin'." Another, "Let her starve for her sins." Laughter followed, thin and mean. Then hooves, slow, heavy, rhythmic. The sound rose above the jeers, echoing down the main street like a heartbeat against the dust. Heads turned. Out from the wavering heat came a rider tall, straight-backed, skin bronze as river stone beneath the sun. His horse, a black Mustang with a scar across its flank, moved with the patient strength of something born from the wild. 6 children trailed behind him on smaller ponies, dark-haired, solemn, their faces carved with quiet endurance. The laughter faltered. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. He dismounted without hurry. His boots met the ground with the soft thud of purpose. His name, though none dared speak it yet, was Elias Lonefeather, a Comanche man whose presence carried both respect and unease through Clay Ridge. His coat was made of deer hide, worn smooth at the elbows. His long black hair, bound with a strip of rawhide, brushed his shoulders. Around his neck hung a turquoise pendant dull with age. His eyes, dark and steady, met Maria's for the briefest moment before turning to the auctioneer. "I offer this horse," he said, voice low but clear, "for her." The crowd erupted. Laughter, cruel and bright, spilled into the air like broken glass. "A horse!" someone barked. "That's rich!" Another shouted, "Buy yourself a wife from your own kind." Even Hayes chuckled, showing teeth yellow as old corn. But Elias didn't blink. He stood like a stone against the storm, his face unreadable. The horse beside him pawed at the dirt, tail flicking restless under the weight of mockery. Elias spoke again, quieter now, but the tone cut deeper than any shout. "I do not need her body to bear life. I need her spirit to keep it alive." The laughter faltered, catching like wind against stone. Even Hayes's smirk wavered. No one moved. No one breathed. The children behind Elias watched with wide eyes, their small fingers gripping their reins. Maria's heart pounded not in fear, but in some strange recognition, as though the words had reached a place in her that grief had sealed shut. Hayes cleared his throat. "One horse," he muttered. "Fine beast, I'll give you that. But we're talking about a woman, not a trade post." Elias stepped closer, eyes level. "You said $5? The horse is worth 50. Take it." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Hayes hesitated. The sheriff leaned against a post, chewing on a toothpick, watching, not interfering, but not helping either. The heat pressed harder, the sun beating on backs and tempers alike. Somewhere, a dog barked once, then went quiet. And then, without understanding why, without even choosing to, the auctioneer's hand lifted and brought the gavel down. The sound cracked like thunder. Sold. The word hung in the air longer than it should have, too heavy, too strange. For a moment, no one moved. Maria blinked, feeling the rope's weight against her wrists. Elias climbed the platform, his shadow falling over her like a promise. He reached for the knot, his fingers rough but steady, and untied it with a care that felt foreign in this place. The rope slipped away, falling to the floorboards with a soft thud. Up close, she could see the lines around his mouth, carved deep from sun and silence. His eyes were not kind in the way she'd known kindness. They held no pity, no indulgence, but something steadier, like earth that had known both drought and bloom. The crowd muttered, unsure whether to jeer or stare. Hayes was already turning away, muttering about fools and savages, though even he avoided meeting Elias's gaze. The sheriff spat into the dust and walked off. The sun still blazed, but the air had shifted, thinner now, touched by something that felt like shame. Elias stepped back, gesturing toward the road that wound out of town, a pale line disappearing into the hills. His voice was quiet, but it carried through the square, through the stilled breath of every onlooker. "You walk with me now?" Maria looked once at the crowd, at the faces that had watched her humiliation, at the child who had laughed and now clung to his mother's skirt, and then she looked toward the horizon. For the first time in months, she felt the wind not as punishment, but as an invitation. She stepped down from the platform barefoot, her feet sinking into the warm dust, her hands free. The horse snorted softly, as if acknowledging her. The children turned their ponies toward the ridge. Elias mounted without another word, his posture unbroken, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. And together the widow and the man who traded a horse for her dignity, they left Clay Ridge behind, the town shrinking in the shimmering heat until it became nothing but a mirage trembling against the sky. The wind picked up, scattering the dust where she had stood. Somewhere, a church bell rang once, faint and lonely, marking the hour or perhaps the moment a soul was quietly reclaimed from despair. "You walk with me now." The words echoed in her mind as the desert opened before them, endless, harsh, and waiting. They walked until the dust gave way to silence. The road narrowed into a trail that wound through red stone and sagebrush, where the wind hummed low songs against the canyon walls. Overhead, the sky burned in the color of fading copper, the sun sinking behind the far ridges like a weary god surrendering its throne. Maria followed a few paces behind Elias Lonefeather, her feet aching, her thoughts drifting between fear and a strange, reluctant calm. The 6 children rode quietly, their ponies' hooves clicking softly on rock, the rhythm like the echo of a heartbeat that no one dared claim as their own. When they reached the canyon rim, the world opened vast, solemn, painted in ochre and gold. There, perched like something half dream, half defiance, stood Elias's home. It was not a house so much as a shape the wind had chosen to spare. Wood darkened by storms, roof patched with hides, the smoke from its chimney rising thin and lonely. A corral leaned tiredly to one side, holding 2 horses, a chestnut mare and a pale dun with one blind eye both lifting their heads at the sound of newcomers. The land around was quiet except for the low murmur of the canyon beneath, where the river whispered its endless secrets to the stones. Elias dismounted first, helping the youngest child down with an ease that spoke of habit. Maria followed, the hem of her dress brushing the dust, her legs trembling from the long walk. The children gathered near the doorway, a boy of about 12, tall and solemn. Another, smaller, whose mischievous eyes darted between Maria and the ground. 2 girls clinging together in the middle, and the youngest, perhaps 5, peeking from behind a blanket draped across the doorway. Her hair was dark and tangled, her eyes wide with the kind of curiosity only children untouched by mercy can hold. She whispered something soft in Comanche, and Maria, not understanding, simply lowered her head in greeting. Elias spoke to the girl in the same tongue, his voice a low rhythm that sounded like the wind smoothing over rock. The girl hesitated, then nodded, stepping back. He turned to Maria. "You sleep by the hearth," he said, tone even, neither command nor kindness, simply truth. "They will teach you by kindness, not words." The inside of the house was dim, the air thick with the scent of cedar smoke and dried herbs. A small fire glowed in the hearth, its light touching shelves lined with clay pots and worn tools. Animal hides hung on the walls, and in one corner, a cradle made of woven reeds stood empty, rocking slightly in the draft that slipped through the cracks. Maria set down her bundle and stood uncertain, unsure if she should speak, but Elias was already tending to the horses outside. The children scattered, one boy feeding kindling to the fire, another fetching water from a bucket. Life moved with a quiet rhythm, practiced and unspoken. When dusk fell, Maria found herself in the kitchen area with a rough table, a pot, and a wooden spoon. She had not cooked for others since her husband died, and her hands trembled as she lit the fire. The eldest boy, Ezra 12, maybe 13, lingered near, pretending to sort wood but watching her every move. His face was narrow, his eyes sharp with a mix of suspicion and curiosity. When she poured salt into the stew, he reached over, quick as a fox, and added another handful. The crystals hissed against the boiling broth. He looked up at her, daring her to scold him. Maria's lips parted, but no sound came. Instead, she picked up the spoon, stirred slowly, then ladled the first bowl and set it before him. "For you," she said simply. Ezra blinked, caught off guard. He took the bowl, sniffed, frowned at the taste, then looked back at her confusion flickering where defiance had been. She said nothing more, only returned to stirring the pot, the rhythm matching the soft patter of rain that had begun against the roof. When the others ate, the air filled with small sounds. The clinking of spoons, the shifting of chairs, the quiet breathing of those still learning trust. Elias sat near the door, his posture straight, his face unreadable in the firelight. Maria caught him glancing her way once, not with judgment, but with the measured watchfulness of a man who has learned to weigh the unseen before speaking. Later, when the children had settled into their bedding, Maria remained by the dying fire. The house had grown still. The only sound was the steady hiss of rain. She lay on the woven mat near the hearth, pulling the old blanket over herself. Her body ached, but sleep would not come. Outside, the wind rose, rattling the shutters like the restless hands of ghosts that never stopped seeking what they'd lost. The storm pressed against the walls, and for a moment she imagined the voices of the town, the laughter, the jeers carried in the rain, haunting her even here at the edge of the world. Then, faintly, a sound, the rustle of fabric. Maria turned. The curtain near the doorway shifted, and a small shadow crept through. It was the youngest girl, bare feet silent on the wooden floor. She carried her blanket, dragging it like a trail of dreams behind her. Without a word, she climbed onto the mat and curled beside Maria, small and trembling. For a moment, Maria didn't move. The child's breath brushed against her arm. Then came a whisper, fragile, uncertain, yet piercing in its innocence. "You smell like Mama." The words broke something inside her that had been locked away too long. Maria turned her face toward the wall, clutching the edge of the blanket as tears gathered. She did not sob. She only wept quietly, letting the soundless grief slip from her into the night. The storm outside answered with its own lament, a song of wind through hollow bones and rain over stone nature's way of mourning what people could not name. The girl's breathing slowed, soft and even, until sleep claimed her. Maria stayed awake, staring at the faint glow of embers, feeling the warmth on her skin and the cold ache in her chest. The fire cracked once, sparks flaring like fleeting stars before fading back into ash. From the far side of the room, half in shadow, Elias Lonefeather stood watching. His arms were crossed, the lines of his face carved by firelight and silence. His eyes, dark and distant, held no clear emotion, not suspicion, not gentleness, only the weight of a man who had seen too much to trust easily, yet not enough to stop hoping. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain through the doorway. The fire flickered once more, and for a heartbeat, their eyes met hers, glistening with quiet sorrow, his steady as stone. Then he turned away, and the night swallowed the sound of his steps. The morning came thin and pale, a fragile light seeping through low clouds that promised rain. The mountains loomed ahead like ancient sentinels, their peaks veiled in mist, their silence older than language itself. Elias Lonefeather saddled the horses early, the sound of leather straps and hooves the only music of dawn. Maria followed his lead without question, her skirt gathered at the knees, her hair tied back with a piece of twine. The air smelled of pine and damp soil, alive, green, and secret. She carried the small axe he'd handed her, the wood handle smooth from his years of use, and though it felt heavy in her palms, she gripped it as though it were her claim to belonging. They climbed higher into the forest, the path narrowing into a tunnel of cedar and spruce. The children moved like small shadows between the trees, quiet, practiced, certain. Elias led the way, his coat damp at the shoulders, his movements steady. Maria watched the rhythm of his stride, the patience in each step, the way he spoke to the oldest boy, Ezra, with a calm authority that made the boy straighten unconsciously. She longed to earn that same tone of quiet regard, to be seen as part of their circle rather than an outsider orbiting its edge. When they reached a clearing, the ground was soft with fallen needles, and the scent of sap hung thick in the cool air. "We cut before the storm," Elias said, handing her a wedge of wood to hold steady. She nodded, eager, and knelt to lift one of the smaller logs. Her fingers brushed the rough bark, and something in her chest stirred a small, foolish pride, the feeling of doing work that mattered. She pulled once, twice. The earth beneath her shifted, a crack suddenly, hollow like a shot muffled by earth. Then the world tilted. One cry escaped her, half surprise, half plea, and the next moment she was falling. Dirt and stone spun around her, a blur of color and sound, and then everything stopped with a jarring thud. She lay on her side, breath knocked out, the smell of crushed leaves filling her lungs. For a long second, she heard nothing, only the dull ringing in her ears, then footsteps thundered down the slope. Elias was there before the dust settled. He knelt beside her, one hand on her shoulder, the other lifting her chin to meet his gaze. His face was drawn tight, jaw clenched, eyes sharp with something between anger and fear. "You could have broken your neck," he said, but his voice trembled faintly beneath the scolding. He lifted her as though she were something fragile, yet necessary, his arms strong and careful all at once. "I can stand," she whispered, though her knees said otherwise. "Next time," he said quietly, "you stay near me." The words weren't harsh. They were something else, something softer, heavier. She wanted to answer, but the moment had already moved past her. He set her down on steady ground and turned back to the others. Ezra and the younger children stared wide-eyed from above, their expressions a mix of awe and confusion, the kind of silence children keep when they've seen an adult bleed, even if only from pride. By midday, the first drops began to fall. The sound came first, a slow tapping on the leaves that grew into 1,000 small drumming hands. The forest dimmed, the light fractured by rain. Elias gave a sharp whistle, and the children gathered close, clutching their bundles of cut wood. "The cave's not far," he said. "Move." The storm came fast. The sky split open, releasing sheets of rain that stung the skin and soaked through every seam. Mud clung to their boots, pulling them down, but Elias's voice cut through the roar, steady as a drumbeat. "Keep close. Don't stop." By the time they reached the cave, their breaths came in clouds of steam. The youngest boy, barely 8, shook uncontrollably, his small hands blue around the edges. Maria caught his arm and pulled him toward the hollow. The cave swallowed them in darkness and cold, the air heavy with the scent of stone and rain. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling, a rhythm that matched her pounding heart. Elias set the bundles down. "Wood's wet," he muttered. Won't catch. Maria crouched by the floor, her fingers numb. She looked at the trembling boy beside her, his teeth chattering, his eyes glassy with fear, and felt something old awaken inside her, something instinctive and steady. "We'll make it catch," she said. Her hands fumbled for the small matchbox tucked into her skirt. One strike, nothing. Second strike, the wind stole it. She cupped her palms, her lips pressed together. On the third try, a small flame trembled to life. She tore a strip from her skirt, dry at the hem, and fed it to the spark. The flame licked upward, fragile but stubborn, catching on bark, on splinters, on hope itself. Within moments, the light began to grow orange, warm, flickering against the damp walls. The children huddled close, their faces glowing in the uncertain firelight. Maria wrapped her arms around the youngest boy, pulling him near. "Breathe with me," she whispered, her voice steady against the storm's rage. "In. Out. You're safe now." The boy's trembling slowed. The others drew nearer, as though her calm were something they could gather like heat. The cave filled with the sound of small breaths sinking together, the rhythm soft and human against the vast, indifferent storm outside. From the mouth of the cave, Elias watched. Rain carved thin silver lines down his face, soaking his hair, his coat, his silence. The firelight painted his features in tones of copper and shadow. He did not smile, but something inside him shifted a quiet surrender that came not from defeat, but recognition. Maria met his eyes briefly through the wavering light. She could not read him, could not tell if he saw her as a guest, burden, or something unnamed between. Yet there was no mockery there, no distance, only the gravity of a man learning to trust the very thing he feared might heal him. The fire crackled, casting sparks that danced up to the cave's low ceiling like brief prayers. The storm outside raged on, unrelenting, but within the cave there was a fragile warmth, the kind that does not ask to last, only to be remembered. Elias stepped forward then, into the glow. His voice, low and roughened by rain, broke the hush. "You're not like the others who came and left." The words hung in the air between them, half confession, half warning, and for a long moment, neither moved, as if any sound might shatter the delicate peace that had chosen, just for now, to stay. The wind carried the scent of sickness before the sound of it reached the house. It came first in the boy's cough, small, sharp, the kind that tried to hide but could not. By the third day, his skin burned beneath Maria's palm, hot and dry, like an ember that refused to die out. His breathing came shallow, the rise and fall uneven, and his eyes rolled beneath lids that no longer stayed still. The room smelled of sweat and cedar smoke. Outside, the canyon echoed with the cries of crows, and the hills seemed to hold their breath. Maria sat by his side, hour after hour, her dress wrinkled, her hair falling loose from its tie. A bowl of broth cooled beside her untouched. She dipped a cloth into water, wrung it out, and pressed it gently to the boy's forehead. He stirred, muttered words in a tongue she didn't know. Sometimes he reached for the air, as if searching for something he'd lost long before fever found him. She whispered softly, words meant for no one but the walls' old lullabies her mother once sang in a house that no longer stood. When night fell, the firelight wavered, and the shadows seemed to move with their own breathing. Maria hummed low, the sound more prayer than song. Every few moments, she wiped his face or lifted his head to give him a spoonful of broth. It dribbled down his chin, and she caught it gently with the corner of her sleeve. The house was silent except for the crackle of flame and the faint groan of the wind pressing against the shutters. Elias had taken the other children to sleep in the loft, but even through the floorboards she could feel his presence, the weight of his pacing, the heaviness of his waiting. At some hour past midnight, when the fire had dwindled to embers, the boy opened his eyes. They glistened with the dull glassiness of fever, and for a moment he looked straight through her. "Mama," he whispered, voice small, broken, lost between dream and delirium. Maria froze, her hand mid-air, her heart clenched, and something ancient, the kind of grief that doesn't belong to one person but to all mothers, rose in her chest. Then, with a steadiness she didn't know she had, she bent close and said softly, "No, sweetheart. I'm just someone who stays." The words fell like water on stone, simple but true enough to echo. The boy's gaze fluttered, then drifted away into sleep. Maria sat back, her eyes stinging, though no tears fell. Outside, the wind shifted, brushing against the windows as if to remind her that the night was long yet not endless. Behind her, a soft creak sounds. Elias stood in the doorway, half shadowed by the dim firelight. His hair was damp with sweat, his shirt open at the collar, and in his hand he held a folded blanket he hadn't realized he was clutching. He didn't speak at first. The look on his face was not one of command or judgment, but of something raw. The recognition of a memory returned without mercy. "My wife cried that same way," he said finally, his voice low and rough, "when our boy nearly died." Maria turned toward him. Her face was pale, weary, her hands trembling slightly. "I'm not here to replace her," she whispered, her throat tight. "And I didn't ask you to," he replied. He stepped closer, the fire catching in his eyes. "But I would not have run to you if you were only her shadow." The silence that followed was fragile, the kind that could shatter with a breath. The wind outside shifted again, and the walls of the house creaked softly in answer. Maria lowered her gaze, her fingers tracing the rim of the empty bowl. She did not know how to reply, or even if she should. The boy moaned once in his sleep, drawing both their eyes back to him. The fever had not yet broken, but his breathing was slower now, a deeper rhythm returning to life. Hours passed like whispers. The fire dwindled to its last glow. Maria leaned against the edge of the bed, exhaustion pulling her under. Elias sat nearby, elbows on his knees, eyes never leaving the boy. When she stirred the next time, dawn was only a pale hint behind the curtain, and the fever like a passing storm had begun to ease. The boy's forehead was cool beneath her touch. His skin, once flushed, now carried the faint sheen of sweat that meant the worst had passed. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The relief was so heavy it felt like sorrow. Elias watched quietly as Maria brushed the boy's hair from his brow. "He'll live," she said softly. He nodded once, his jaw working, as if the words themselves were too sacred to echo. Then he rose, walked to the hearth, and threw a few dry sticks into the dying fire. The flames caught quickly, chasing back the pale gray of morning. He picked up the blanket he'd carried before and draped it over her shoulders. "Rest," he said simply. She wanted to protest, to tell him she was fine, that there was still broth to heat, wood to stack, but her body betrayed her. Her limbs ached, her eyelids heavy. She sank down beside the boy's bed, head resting on her folded arms. Within moments, sleep claimed her. Elias remained. He sat by the fire, the chair creaking under his weight, his hands clasped before him. The dawn came slow and quiet, washing the room in the muted gold of forgiveness. Every so often, he looked at the woman asleep by his son, her face softened in rest, the light catching on the stray strands of hair against her cheek. He didn't understand what she had become to them. Not wife, not stranger. Something in between, but he knew enough to guard it. He stayed there until the first beam of sunlight touched the floorboards, until the fire dimmed to a warm pulse, until the sound of breathing hers and the boys settled into harmony. And just as the light began to fill the room, a sound broke through the stillness. A knock, sharp, deliberate, official, echoed against the wooden door. Elias straightened slowly, the peace of the night slipping away like mist. The knock came again. The morning air was dry, tense, still. The knock from dawn had not been a stranger's gesture. It was a summons. When Elias opened the door, 4 men stood outside, their shadows long across the dust. They were elderly men whose faces were carved by years of sun and determination, whose eyes had seen too many winters to doubt their own authority. Each wore a blanket woven with the old patterns of the Comanche, red and black lines that told stories of blood and endurance. "You brought a white woman into our land without counsel," said the tallest. His voice like gravel rolled in the wind. His name was Tahoma, gray-haired, with the build of one who had once been a warrior but now carried his strength in silence. Another stepped forward, younger, thin but sharp-eyed Nikai, whose tongue was as quick as his mistrust. "And she teaches your children the enemy's tongue," he hissed. His breath smoked in the cold morning air. Elias stood still, his shoulders squared, eyes steady. Behind him, Maria appeared at the doorway, her face pale against the firelight within. The children huddled at her sides, uncertain, half curious, half afraid. The tension in the air felt like something alive, a creature waiting to strike. Maria stepped out. The wind lifted the edge of her shawl, the smell of cedar and smoke swirling around her. She didn't wait for Elias to speak. "I teach them to read what will be used against them," she said quietly, her voice calm but cutting through the silence. "So they can survive and not forget who they are." Tahoma's eyes flickered, just for a heartbeat, but Nikai's face hardened. "Your words are clever," he said. "Clever words brought war to our people." No one spoke after that. The elders turned, their silence heavier than any curse. When they left, the sound of their footsteps lingered long after they were gone. That night, whispers moved through the village like smoke, bitter, restless, searching for weakness. Some said Elias had betrayed his blood. Others said Maria had cursed the children's tongues with her teaching. Stones struck the walls after sunset, small at first, then more. The horses in the corral startled, their hooves thudding against the earth. Elias met the attackers at the doorway. His hands, unarmed, met their fury with raw strength. One man lunged young, angry, his face half lit by moonlight, and Elias drove him to the ground. The scuffle broke apart when someone shouted his name, but the damage was done. In the faint light, Maria saw the truth. The boy writhing in the dirt was the son of a respected elder. Blood darkened his lip, his pride far worse wounded. When quiet returned, she found Elias sitting on the step, knuckles raw, the night still humming with the aftermath. "They'll cast you out," she warned, her voice low, trembling not with fear for herself, but for them all. Elias looked up, the fire behind him catching the edge of his jaw. "Then I'll not be alone," he said. The words fell soft but steady, not defiant, simply real. Weeks turned into months. The storm of anger slowly thinned into silence. Suspicion still lingered, but the stones stopped flying. The children began to laugh again, timid at first. then freely. By the hearth, under the soft flicker of candlelight, Maria spread scraps of paper and charcoal. She guided small fingers across them, tracing letters, then words, their sounds strange but sacred in the quiet house. Ezra, once the boldest, now sat closest, whispering each letter with care. The youngest girl giggled when she misspoke, and Maria corrected her gently, never losing patience. Even Elias would pause at the doorway sometimes, leaning against the frame, pretending to listen to the rain while his eyes followed the soft movement of her hands. And for a time, peace, fragile, uncertain, but real, made its home among them. Then, one morning by the creek, that peace trembled. The sky hung low with mist, the kind that blurred the world into shades of gray. Maria knelt by the water, rinsing a cloth. The current was cold, and the reflection of her face swayed with every ripple. When she tried to stand, her vision spun. Her knees gave way. The sound of rushing water rose around her, and she barely caught the edge of a rock before falling. The taste of metal filled her mouth. Her stomach twisted sharply. She pressed a hand to her lips, to her chest, and then lower. The nausea was deep, tidal. It came again the next day, and the next. By the third dawn, Elias sent for a healer. The woman arrived before sunrise, bent slightly, her hair braided with silver thread and feathers faded with age. Her name was Sally, known for her quiet hands and eyes that looked farther than most cared to. She carried no medicine, only a small pouch of sage and the smell of rain. She knelt beside Maria, her fingers cool and knowing as they pressed against the skin just below her ribs. The silence stretched long before she spoke. "You carry life," she said softly, in a tone neither celebratory nor condemning, just truth, heavy and simple. Maria's breath caught. For a long while she said nothing. The words felt impossible, too large for the room, too strange for the quiet she'd built around her heart. Elias stood nearby, unreadable, his shadow falling across the floor. Later, alone, Maria sat by the window, one hand resting over her abdomen. She watched the dawn roll slowly over the hills. She did not weep. She only listened to the birds calling in the distance, to the whisper of the wind through the trees, and felt something new, terrifying, sacred stir within her. She told no one. Not that day, nor the days that followed. Not out of shame, but out of fear that the fragile balance between her and the world outside would shatter under the weight of truth. The children needed safety. Elias needed peace. And she, perhaps for the first time, wanted both. But secrets are living things. They breathe, and they wait. On the 7th morning after the healer's visit, when the air was still and heavy with the scent of rain yet to fall, a rider appeared on the ridge. Dust rose behind him like a trail of ghosts. He was young, dressed in tanned leather, the symbol of the council carved into the wooden staff strapped to his saddle. His horse, gray with eyes pale as frost, stopped at the fence. Elias stepped outside, meeting him halfway. No words were needed. The messenger unrolled the parchment, its edges sealed with red clay. A summons. The tribal council demanded Elias Lonefeather and the woman he'd taken into his home stand before them in judgment. Maria stood in the doorway, her hand resting instinctively on her stomach, though she didn't yet understand why. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of rain through the valley. The messenger turned and rode away, leaving behind only the dust and the silence that follows when destiny finally remembers your name. The wind came first, restless, circling, heavy with the scent of cedar and smoke. Then the fire, built in the center of the clearing, rose with a slow, crackling defiance, its light licking the faces of those gathered beneath the ancient tree. The council sat in a ring, their shadows trembling across the dust, the murmurs of the tribe thick behind them. Beyond the circle, Maria stood beside Elias, her face pale beneath the orange glow, her hands clasped before her stomach as if holding the very air in place. The great cedar swayed overhead, its branches whispering like old spirits. The eldest of the council spoke first to Homa, his voice dry as the roots of the land. "She carries mixed blood," he said, each word striking like a flint. "You defy our ways." His gaze shifted to Elias, and for a heartbeat the entire world seemed to tilt toward that silence. Elias opened his mouth, but Maria was already stepping forward. The air seemed to part for her. Her bare feet sank slightly into the earth, the dust rising around her like a halo. "Do not blame him," she said, her voice low but steady, a tremor of truth within it. "I came with lies I believed about myself, that I was broken, unworthy, but love showed me otherwise." The murmur grew anger in some voices, confusion in others. Nikai rose, his face sharp in the firelight. "Love?" he spat. "You name sin as love?" Maria did not flinch. "If mercy is sin," she said quietly, "then the world deserves to die." The words rippled through the crowd, silencing even the whispers. Elias watched her not as a protector now, but as a witness. His jaw was tight, his eyes full of something between awe and fear, as though realizing that her courage had surpassed his own. Then came a sound small, uncertain, the shifting of a foot on dry ground. Nathan, the oldest of Elias's sons, stepped into the circle. 17, tall and wiry, with his father's dark eyes and his mother's absence etched into his expression. He looked from the elders to Maria, and when he spoke, his voice carried beyond the fire. "If you send her away," he said, "I will go too." No one moved. He took another step forward. "She's my mother now." The air itself stopped moving. The fire seemed to pause in its crackle. From behind Maria, the youngest child, the little girl who once whispered, "You smell like Mama," ran forward and wrapped her small arms around Maria's skirt. The crowd drew in a collective breath. No more words were needed. Elias exhaled, long and slow, and the fight left his body. The council did not speak. Even Tahoma lowered his head, as if listening to something older than law, something that did not belong to men. The fire dimmed, the night deepened, and the meeting dissolved not with verdict, but with understanding. Later, the moon hung full above the cottonwood tree near their home. The air shimmered silver, and the land was so still it seemed to be waiting for breath. Maria's pain came quietly at first, a tremor through her spine, a gasp between sentences, then stronger, faster, undeniable. Elias was at her side in an instant, his hands rough yet gentle as he guided her down onto the woven blanket near the hearth. The children huddled close, eyes wide, whispering prayers in two tongues. Outside, wind swept through the tall grass, bending it like waves, and then a cry. Small, fragile, but fierce. A boy. Tiny, perfect, his chest rising and falling with the rhythm of dawn itself. Maria held him close, tears streaming silently down her face. Elias leaned near, his forehead touching hers, his voice trembling in the space between them. "He's real," he whispered. She smiled through the salt of her tears. "So are we." The sun rose slowly and golden the next morning, washing the valley in new light. Word spread through the village not by shouting, but by the quiet awe that travels between hearts. Some came to see the child, others only to stand nearby, their eyes softening as they watched Elias carry water or Maria hum softly by the doorway. By the time of the harvest festival, the world had changed. The tribe gathered once more beneath the same cedar tree, but this time the air was different. The fire burned brighter. Laughter mingled with the music of flutes and drums. The children danced barefoot in the dust, their hands stained with the colors of crushed berries. When Elias stepped forward, the murmurs faded. He took Maria's hand, the same hand once bound by rope in the auction square, and lifted it high before the fire. His voice carried steady, clear. "She came as an outsider," he said. "She stays as my wife not by law but by heart." The crowd bowed their heads not in judgment but in quiet respect. Even Nikai, standing at the edge of the light, said nothing. The drums beat softly, steady as the heartbeat of the land. And somewhere above, beyond the reach of firelight and song, the wind carried her laughter across the prairie, the laughter of a woman who was once sold, and now, finally, beautifully chosen. Some stories don't end where the words stop. They linger, like the echo of footsteps fading into quiet earth. This one is not just about a woman or a man, but about how mercy finds its way even through the hardest soil. Sometimes the world takes everything from you, your pride, your place, your name, and still life whispers, there's more. More to give, more to forgive, more to love. Because love, in its truest form, doesn't shout. It endures. It teaches us that strength isn't always in the hands that fight, but in the hearts that stay. And maybe somewhere out there, someone like Maria or Elias still walks two souls who learned that redemption is never beyond reach, and that even the broken can build something whole again. Tell me where you're watching from tonight. If this story touched your heart, share it so someone else might remember what kindness feels like. And don't forget to subscribe, so you won't miss the next light that flickers through the dark. Until then, may your night be calm and your heart be brave.